From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. Hey, James, I'm glad to be back with you for another great show.
Always be great to be with you, Steve, here. Enjoying what we're doing and looking forward to this topic.
Sounds good to me. I believe that we were just recently on Higher Ed AV podcast with Joe Way. So it was actually a lot of fun, and we got to tell our story a bit. And I hope that our audience will check us out there. It could give you a little bit of context if you haven't been with us since the beginning, how we came about doing this. And thank you, Joe, for having us. And we can provide a little bit of good banter about programming. So check that out, and we'll provide a link to it in the show notes. Today, we're going to talk a little bit. We're kind of playing off of our recent episode. We're going to talk a little bit about how do you plan a programming project. So one of the challenges, I think, a lot of times is that programmers don't get included and usually have to be left trying to make everything work. And I'm sure that a lot of you out there are listening or nodding your head, and I'm glad. I hope that this is relatable. So what I think is a good thing for us to talk about is how can we change that? How do we get programmers more involved? How do we get them that proverbial seat at the table? And what's a good way to make everybody play nicely when it comes to making the job of delivering a successful outcome with programming more successful? So, James, I'll let you kind of jump in if you want to share some experiences. Obviously, your perspective in higher ed and as a in-house programmer may be a little bit different from mine as a third-party programmer, but this is what makes this conversation a lot of fun and very beneficial.
Oh, I agree. Our different views allow us to see it fuller picture of what's going on for us programmers. But yeah, it's a hard topic, I think, of getting programmers to the table. I know I mentioned this before. It might have been on this podcast, might have been on the Higher Ed AV one with Joe, or might have been both. But I feel like we've always say AV is the last people to the table, and I feel programmers are the last people to the table for AV. It's one of those things no one thinks about until it needs to be done, because I feel just like AV, it's a given. Oh, all you have to do is slap a TV on the wall. Oh, well, all you have to do is slap some code in, because people don't understand it. They don't understand all the back end, all the work that we need to do to make things work, and they don't know the full skills we can do. There's been a couple projects I've been to where I've heard the tech was talking to the user and saying, yeah, the equipment can do that, but I got to make sure the programmer can do that. Like, because they don't know. And I wonder how many like salespeople who go on calls are the same way. It's like, well, yeah, the equipment can do it, but can our programmer do it? That becomes a question that comes up, because you don't want to overpromise. You don't want to say, yeah, I can make the disco ball spin 1,000 RPMs, because the equipment might be able to do it, but can the programmer can actually spin it at 1,000 RPMs? Who knows? But having a programmer there working with the tech and the user can address any of these questions. Or the user might have a crazy option that they want, and then the programmer will be like, yeah, I can do that. Or no, we can't do that, where the tech may not know.
I think you bring up a really good point too. And it's not obvious to everybody that the control side of devices is not the same as what you might do when you're going to press the buttons on the actual unit or operate it manually. We like to hope so, but it's not always the case. And, sometimes, back in the day when you had IR control and that was a lot more prevalent, it was easier to demonstrate that because you pick up the remote and you say, okay, I could do what the remote can do, but I'm not getting any feedback like you are. So think about this with your eyes closed. And when you're pressing a button, you don't know what's happened. When you get into some of the two-way control, that gives you a lot more tools at your disposal, only if the API provides that. And that's one of the concerns. And it's something that, as you mentioned, and I hate to pick on salespeople because they're the natural target, just like programmers are a natural target for why things don't work or are complicated. That we need to have more of that conversation. A salesperson that says that programming is the deciding factor needs to go to their programmer and say, hey, am I doing right here? Is this device going to work? And one way to do that is get a device and bench test it. Work with it before you actually have to put it into a project.
Oh yeah, I'm all for that. I'm all for testing and demoing equipment and making sure that it works. Because this is a saying of Joe Way. I know we're name dropping him multiple times today, which is good.
He really won't mind.
No, he's definitely shy of the spotlight, but sometimes you got to drop his name, I guess. But he mentions especially in higher ed, we buy one, most likely we're buying 200 of them. So I don't want to spend the money for 200 devices if it's not going to do what I need it to do. So I got to be able to get a unit in, play with it, code it, and making sure that everything works well before I roll out 200 of them.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a really, really good example, quite honestly. And it's for me, I think the idea, and we talked about this previously too, is using proven devices is going to get you more probability of proven outcomes. Not to say that you shouldn't use new devices, but do it with not with caution, but also with a little bit more care, so that you're actually taking the time and knowing that this is going to fit. And I think that's super critical. But as we mentioned in the previous episode, the whole idea of knowing how to design a system with control in mind, or asking a programmer what's going to make something easier. What can I do to reduce your effort, your time? What can I do to make this turn out better? How can we reduce the overall cost so we can either make the project more profitable or get it done quicker or be able to save money? I think programmers are an untapped resource for that, quite honestly.
I agree, and kind of plays off of our earlier episode, the last week one, where why we cost so much money for programmer. But if our clients or users or even our salespeople are always throwing new equipment at us, that takes time to learn it. I agree with you. You can't get stagnant. You can't be sticking with the same stuff all the time, because you got to learn and grow. But you can't always throw that on projects. So if you want to keep costs down, keeping with the similar project equipment keeps your programming costs down.
Without a doubt. We talked a little bit too about, how do you take programming and get it priced? And, so I think that's an interesting thing for us to delve into a little bit about. What are some things so you're it can play the role of a client very easily. How can you scope programming? How can you be able to get pricing that is going to be a level playing field and has less open to interpretation?
I think it might be a little hard on programming, but you really got to get down and define it. So as you mentioned, we're outcome based. So if you can define every piece of equipment and define what the outcome is, and that, okay, the user interface looks like this because this is our standard. Very big in higher education. Our standards layouts are unique, not unique, but spread across our 200 rooms or how many rooms we have. So given that layout and given that equipment list, there's little interpretation for programming. So if you send it out to 5 companies and you get wide range of prices, but you're getting like, as long as you're getting the same outcome and with the same user interface with your standard, it's apples to apples, because the coder, you're getting what you need. And if one programmer can do it with modules and configurator, and the other one has to do everything by line and brand new, that's where your different costs come in.
So I want to pick on that a little bit because I think you brought up a couple of good points there. I mean, one is, to what extent do you define? Do you provide a button by button? I mean, how detailed do you come up with your description? But then the second is what do you also specify the requirements? How do you want it written? Because doing something in configuration versus writing it in code versus using modules, those can be cost savings to the programmer and save them time, but it may not also sync up with what you're expecting. And that's yet another good topic for us to explore in the future, which is why this is such a great conversation.
Definitely. It's like I said, I haven't been on the user side spec'ing programming requirements. I've been there when we spec equipment and design, and that we get very detailed on. So I figured, I'm assuming we can do the same with programming, but I don't know firsthand. But I do know we're doing our classrooms. We're saying what model projector we want, and I'm telling you what model control processor I want and what keypad I want and how it's wired up. To a point, like I'm, instead of using HMI, it might be HT-based T. That but I'm not, like we said, we spec all that equipment in. So if let's say for example, I'm getting a Samsung TV and I spec this model Samsung TV, and bidder 1 goes to Best Buy and buys it, and bidder 2 gets it from a supplier, and bidder 3 builds his own. As long as there's Samsung model TV, it's apples to apples. I don't care where you get it. It's the same model.
Right.
And it kind of, you got to do the same, I guess, with the programming is, if you're going to eventually have a third party or a in-house person, or that you're going to need someone else to maintain this, you got to spec that out.
Yeah.
So that when they're bidding, it's easy for you to do that.
I would agree with that, because I think that's where a lot of the variables come in, and it's hard because, so one of the things that I can share from an experience standpoint is that when we are presented with a bid, and so many times that comes from a consultant, sometimes it comes from an end user, and programming is left to be open to interpretation, your numbers are going to be all over the place. And unless you understand what is expected of you, either you going to go in and try to price it aggressively and say, okay, this is what all that I'm doing, or you're going to try to read into it, and then that's going to inflate your effort. And that's where a lot of the discrepancies come in. It can be a very, very challenging, quite honestly. And from an outsider's view, that's always been the difficulty we've had. And kind of looping back around to, having the seat at the table, one of the things that I try to offer people is, hey, let's sit down and write that scope, write that 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 programming description, so that when you do go and have it priced, at least you know that everybody's pricing it to the same requirements.
That's a good way. Definitely a good way to do it.
It's not something that's commonly done, but it could be, to me, that's I think the value. Writing the code, of course, takes talent, but it's understanding what needs to happen that I think is the where all the value comes in.
Yeah, definitely.
As well as the back end of troubleshooting and making it work. But we've talked about that quite a bit too.
Yeah.
I guess, as we wrap up, do you see in the future this changing a little bit? Do you have more of a sense that programmers should be looking at getting involved in doing some design, or do you like, well, what could help a programmer's situation, whether it's for higher ed or just in a role in general, to try to make they make their influence more valuable to a project?
I would probably say be a person of many hats. Learn designing. Programming is definitely good, but as we mentioned, we're a unique beast, and a lot of people don't understand what we do. So it's one of those things that like, oh, it shouldn't be that hard, because they don't understand it. They don't understand all the work we do there. So having things that make you stand out, where you say, I can program and I can do the UI as well, and the UX, and I can install the equipment as well. Now you're making yourself more marketable, because instead of going to a integrator and saying, okay, you're going to install this equipment, and then we're going to go out to a third party programming house and you're going to write the code for it, and then 6 months now we're going to go hire a full-time person to maintain all this, or can I go and hire this jack of all trade who can install, who can program it and design the system? I think that's where your value is. But then again, once you become a jack of all trades, you're a jack of nothing. So it's a little hard. But I definitely think the more marketable you are, the better you are. If you become a one-trick pony, you're going to be passed over quickly, I feel.
Sure. This is certainly an ongoing conversation, and I'd be curious to hear what our audience has to say. So please reach out to us with some info. Do you struggle with being last man in? Can you relate to what we're saying there? I mean, we always say the programmer is the one that's left to turn the lights off, and what can we do about it? Because I think that this is something. It's nothing new. It's been going on for a long time, but it'd be a good thing for this community to talk about a little bit more, and see if we can bubble this up to get programmers to be both recognized and also their voices heard to help, because in the end, we're all trying to do a good job and we're all trying to make things work. So why overcomplicate things unnecessarily? James, how can people get in touch with you, share some feedback, and learn what you're up to?
Well, easiest way to get a hold of me is on Twitter, AV_James King. You can find me on higheredav.com, writing the IT and AV column. HEPMA, LinkedIn, I'm there a little bit, but not much. Or even hopefully some Sunday mornings with AV and AM.
Sounds good. I'd like to see you there and join in that conversation. You can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on most social media platforms. Twitter and LinkedIn are probably where I hang out the most. You could read a little bit of my writing on AV Network, which is the AV technology magazine. And also I write the blog for my company's website at controlconcepts.net, as well as other members of my team. But we would like to hear from you, and we hope to continue to have this conversation. And it is most beneficial and most effective when we have feedback and participation from our audience. So please look for us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and so forth. And we'd like to hear from you. With that said, this has been Ask the Programmer.